Hey everybody, I'm Scotty J. You are watching Rock Titan Live. I have got an incredibly amazing guest with us today, folks. I mean, for all of you that have been watching Rock Titan Live, you know that we regularly feature some of the biggest rock stars in the world, always musicians. But as you all know, there's a lot of moving parts in the entertainment industry, and what actually makes these musicians that we talk to able to have a career. The guest we have with us right now basically created the profession of what it is to be a music publicist. He created the biggest PR firm, the most successful PR firm in the history of the world. He's represented artists like Michael Jackson, who we will talk about. We're talking about Prince, ZZ Top, Billy Joel, Billy Idol, Queen, hundreds more. You get the idea. Absolutely insane. He just published his 7th book, Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Howard Bloom.
Thanks, Scott.
Howard,
Wonderful
how are you? Thank you. Thank you.
I'm delighted to be here.
It's an honor. It's an honor. And before we get into, everything, which we're going to have a great time with, I got to give a shout out to Miss Eileen Shapiro and Jimmy Starr. I'm very grateful for their friendship and having enough confidence in me to be worthy of the time, that we're sharing right now. So thank you guys. I love you very much. And so this is awesome. I just told everybody in the opening, you basically created what we know today as music PR, but your whole background is in science. How do you go from being basically a prodigy at 10 years old, and I think it's safe to say you're a science prodigy, and that's been, the biggest part of your life other than music?
Well, here's the deal. Okay, at the age of 10, I was a lost child. My parents didn't want to have anything to do with me. I don't know why. They were very, very busy. And the other kids in my hometown of Buffalo, New York, wanted to have nothing to do with me. And one day I was sitting in my family's living room. And you know how you know the location of every book your parents own? Because it's always been in the same place on the shelves, always. A book appeared that I'd never seen before, that had no place on the shelves, in my lap. And it said, the first 2 rules of science are these. The truth at any price, including the price of your life. And it told the story of Galileo, and it told it all wrong. It said that Galileo was willing to go to the stake to defend his truth. Not true. But I needed this heroic story, this icon of courage. And the second rule of science, look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. Look for things that are right under your nose, that are invisible to you, and invisible to everybody around you, and flush them into visibility, and then proceed from there. And it gave the example of Anton von Leeuwenhoek, who took a lens. He was a draper. He was importing fabric to Amsterdam. And he took the lens that he used to examine the cloth, to see how tight the weave was and how regular the weave was. And he turned it down at pond water. And he discovered an entire world that humans had been living with ever since humans evolved 200,000 years ago, modern humans. And it was the world of microorganisms. He saw what he called animalcules. He saw protozoa. He saw bacteria. He saw this vast world that we're fighting with right now with the coronavirus crisis. So these 2 guys reached out across 350 years and grabbed me, and they gave me a reason to live. They gave me a religion of truth and courage. That's rule number 1. And awe and wonder. Awe, wonder, and surprise. That's rule number 2. And trying to perceive things from a radically different view than they've ever been perceived before. Well then, 2 years later, after I'd read 2 books a day, which I think would be about 1,400 books or something like that, I read 1 book under the school desk, and I read another book when I came home. And my teachers hated me. I never paid attention to any of them. I was too busy educating myself. So at any rate, 2 years later, I realized I was an atheist, but didn't dare confess it to myself for a reason. My bar mitzvah was coming up. And my bar mitzvah would be the first party I'd ever been invited to in Buffalo, New York in my life. And it would also involve presents. And if I confessed that I was an atheist, I'd blow the presents and the party. So I waited until the bar mitzvah was over. I waited the 2 months it took me to write thank you notes to all the people who sent presents. And then I was able to confess to myself, I'm an atheist. And that was the end of August. Well, I'm Jewish. I'm a Jewish atheist. And the beginning of September, something strange happens on the Jewish calendar, the high holidays. Now, my parents were not observant. They only went to temple when there was a bar mitzvah or a wedding, and they were obliged to show up for the sake of their friends' kids. But when it came to the high holidays, that was an absolute. You must go to the high holidays, period. So they got me in a suit, which must have been very difficult because I hate suits. They got me into their blue Fraser automobile, an American automobile. They drove me all the way to Richmond Avenue where the synagogue was, and that's as far as they could get me. And at that point, I held on to the door frame while my parents were pulling at my ankles. And they literally were ready to drag me like a sack of cement up the sidewalk to the synagogue. And as they were tugging at my ankles, I had a sudden realization. Galileo, who was the truth at any price, including the price of your life, incarnate, had taken a lens. He'd taken a device designed for horizontal viewing. In other words, to see troops coming towards you before they could realize that you saw them. It was called a spyglass. Brand new invention. Long tube with lenses at both ends. And instead of using it horizontally, the way that it was meant to be used, he did something outrageous. He turned it vertical. And he looked at the sky. And that was outrageous because the sky is God's own underwear. And everybody knew exactly what was up there. Circles. Why? Because Aristotle said that circles were perfection. And God is perfection, right? And what Galileo discovered was shocking. He saw things that looked like lumpy, bumpy stones in the sky. Not just the moon with all of its scars and pits and craters, but planets that looked like lumpy, bumpy rocks. And he changed the way we see the universe. Absolutely changed the way we see the universe. And Anton von Leeuwenhoek had taken the lens and turned it down to see animalcules. And I suddenly realized I'm an atheist, so there are no gods in the heavens. And there are no gods under the earth. But there are gods in this scene, with my parents furiously tugging at my ankles, shredding my socks. The gods are in my parents. Look at the degree of passion with which they were committed to getting me to the synagogue. And if the gods are in my parents, then the gods are in me. And my job is to take the lens and turn it inward. Not totally original to me. Sigmund Freud had done the same. But that was my job, to find the gods inside. So when it came time, we won't go my scientific more. I mean, we'll skip over most of my scientific depth.
If you're talking to your clients this way, Howard, I can only imagine they're looking at you like, like they've just got to be completely blown away. Like, did you have talks like this with the Jackson 5 or with Prince or Joan Jett, who I want to touch on? Like all of these amazing, iconic artists, that you have been instrumental at some point in time in their careers. Have you had, like the kind of talk we're having right now, did you have these talks with them?
Yes, but here's how it went. If you came to me interested in having me work with you, I gave you a little speech. And the little speech said, if you expect me to fashion an artificial mask for you and sit back like a guy in a plaid suit with a cigar in his hand and say, kid, I'm going to make you a star, then I'm going to send you to my best competitor. I don't do that. Okay. I don't do image. Okay. I don't do image. If you're going to work with me, you have to understand that music is not an exchange of pieces of plastic. It is not an exchange of downloads. It is not an exchange of money. It is an exchange of fucking goddamn human soul. Right. And if you are willing to work with that, and if you are willing to work with my terms, I will work with you. But my terms are these. You will give me 6 weeks to study everything you have ever written, every piece of music you've ever made, every album cover, every article on you, everything. And then you're going to give me at least 1 day alone with me, with no wives, no managers, no intercessors, just you and me. And why am I going to be there? Because when you sit down at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you've got an album due, and you need to write a lyric. You know you can never write a lyric again in your life, and you have no idea of how you've ever written your previous lyrics. And on a reasonably good day, by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there's a lyric in front of you. And on a really good day, maybe twice in your life, that lyric is so perfect it feels like it wrote itself through you. I'm going to find the gods inside of you, the soul inside of you, that wrote those lyrics. And when you go on stage on a really good night, you see the eyes of the audience widening. You see their pupils dilating, growing wide. You see their faces melting. You see 700 or 7,000 or 70,000 people melting into one big amoebic blob of common energy. And you see that amoebic blob reach a pseudopod out to you like a tunnel, like the tunnel kids crawl through, and send that energy, 70,000 souls, energy going through you. And you see it go someplace around here. You see it utterly transmogrified. And you see it channeled back down to the audience, and you pick up the amazement on the audience's face of what you have just done, and it again transmogrifies into something weird and strange, and you have an out-of-body experience. You're on the ceiling. You're watching yourself being danced like a marionette by these energies, this energy flow. I'm going to find the gods inside of you that danced you like a marionette. And if you're willing to tolerate that, then I will work with you. Otherwise, as I said, I'll send you to my best competitor. So, yes, it was a talk derived from this absolute need to find the gods inside that was the basis of what I did with my clients. And I also told them, look, you don't just owe your audience your songs. You owe your audience your life. It took me 20 years, Scott, after I left the business, to figure out what in the world I had meant by this. But what I meant was, you're Joan Jett. You've just done a photo shoot. You've got 3,500 photos. You give them to me. I go into a dark room with a magnifying glass, and what am I looking for? I'm looking for the pictures that kids, 12 boys, 12 and a half years old, who have just discovered their masculinity, who have just had their first erections and ejaculations. I'm looking for the pictures that they will put on your walls, on their walls. But there's another thing here, aside from sexuality. And the other thing is, you will be the trellis on which these people will grow. They will imprint on you. You are giving them far more than just your songs. You are giving them a role model. So,
absolutely,
my artists, if they were going to work with me, had to live up to some very heavy-duty standards. Except they couldn't help living up to those standards, Scott, because that's what happens to you when you are a musician. That's what happens to you when you're sitting in front of a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen to write a lyric. Something seizes you that you do not know and writes stuff through you. My job is to find that hidden self, that soul, those hidden gods, and to introduce them to the hello, how are you, fine, thank you very much self of the everyday. When my clients used to go on stage, it would take them an hour for their normal personalities to return. And for some of them, that was agonizing, especially for John Mellencamp, who would go backstage. He would find a room before they ever got started where he could lock himself up with one other person, sometimes his wife, once upon a time me, and sit there in a state of agony.
Wow.
As he changed from the gods inside controlling him to John Mellencamp, hello, how are you? Fine, thank you very much, and how are you? And he swore he would never go on tour again. John was one of the most powerful performers in history. And he swore over and over again that he would never tour again.
Wow.
Why? Because of that agony of needing to come back to who you are on a normal basis from being filled with 70,000 souls and the souls, the gods inside of you. And those gods inside were my job, Scott.
They don't make publicists like you anymore. They do not make publicists like you anymore. I swear, they broke the mold with you, Howard.
Well, that's the difficulty. You have these wildly talented people like Ben Harper and Adam Levine of Maroon 5.
Right. Yep.
Incredibly talented people. And nobody is doing for them what I did for John Mellencamp and Michael Jackson and Prince and Bob Marley and Bette Midler. Nobody's doing that for them. Instead, people are hooking them up with ginger ale sponsorships and other corporate sponsorships. And what are they doing? Well, once upon a time, John Mellencamp called me, and he said, I have a problem. I've just been offered $1.25 million by Heinz for my song Hurt So Good. They are making a virtue of the fact that it's so hard to get ketchup out of that goddamn glass bottle. So they used Carly Simon's Anticipation, and now they want to use Hurt So Good. Should I take the money? And I said, John, what do you want to be doing in 15 years? Do you want to be living off your investments? Or do you want to be in front of your audiences making music? And the answer was making music. I said, then you have to turn down the sponsorship. And you have to turn it down for this reason. What are you? When you go on stage, you are a bundle of muscle. And you are all rebellion. And you are basically saying, if I am locked out of the city, the establishment, the big city where all the people with power live, and I'm on the outside the walls, and people think I'm less than a flea, people think I'm invisible, people think I'm worthless. You are saying, on behalf of all those people who feel that way, sorry, I am not worthless. I have an identity. I have a right to be. And fuck you. That is basically what you are saying it with your body language. You don't even have to say it in words.
Right.
And if you go into the walls and become part of the establishment and part of what locks most people out, you will no longer be that voice. You will no longer be here for what you are put here for. So you cannot accept that ad. And John Mellencamp's client, his manager, quit.
Wow.
Over that decision.
Wow.
And 10 years later, nobody ever calls to thank you if you're a publicist. 10 years later, when I was stuck in bed, when I was real sick, John Mellencamp called, and I reminded him of that moment. And I reminded him of two important moments. And he said, thank you, you made me tens of millions of dollars. But it wasn't the tens of millions of dollars that counted, Scott. It was feeding his fucking soul.
Right. Right.
Which he probably didn't have the vocabulary to thank me for. And the other incident was one day, I looked over, I was keeping track of all of the sales figures on all of the major artists, and John Mellencamp had the biggest selling album of 1983. So I put out a press release saying that John Mellencamp had the biggest selling album of 1983. And I got a call from Bob Merlis. Bob Merlis was the vice president of publicity at Warner Brothers. Now, Warner Brothers and CBS each controlled 33% of the music industry. Between them, they controlled 66% of the music industry. The other four major companies in the firm had to divvy up the remaining 33%. They were paltry compared to Warner Brothers and CBS. And Bob Merlis is the vice president of publicity for Warner Brothers, this monolithic company. And he said, you've put out a press release saying John Mellencamp is the best-selling album of 1983. I said, yes, I have. He said, I've got news for you. John Mellencamp does not have the biggest-selling album of 1983. Asia has the biggest-selling, or Europa, I forget their name, has the biggest-selling album of 1983. This was an artificial group pasted together by some clever talent scout at Warner Brothers. And they were hyping it for all that they were worth.
Sure.
And I said, no, John Mellencamp has the biggest selling album of 1983. And Bob said, you don't understand me. We control 33% of the music industry. You know that some of my best friends are in high places at CBS. And you know that they control another 33% of the music industry. If John Mellencamp has the biggest selling album of 1983, You will never get another act from Warner Brothers, and you will never get another act from CBS.
Woo!
And yes, and I said, Bob, listen to me carefully. John Mellencamp has the biggest selling album of 1983. If you produce figures demonstrating that Asia has a bigger selling album than CBS than John Mellencamp, I will personally put out a press release saying that Asia has the biggest selling album of 1983. But until you get me those figures, John Mellencamp has the biggest selling album of 1983. And that was the end of the conversation. Wow. Now, John Mellencamp almost never called me. Almost never. And he called 10 minutes later. Now, John calls himself a little bastard. He's very proud of how tough he is, right? How good he is in a fight. And I thought he would appreciate this story. So I told it to him. And Scott, you could hear him filling up with piss yellow, like sample, like a doctor's, a urologist sample cup, as I told him the story. And when I reached the end, he said, Howard, you should not have done that.
Oh my God.
So 10 years or more later, when he called me, the call in which he thanked me, he was also thanking me for that.
That's
amazing. I reminded him of the story.
That's amazing. Yeah, having a call like that with those juggernauts, like you talked about, and they play the whole "Do you know who I am?" card. Like if you go against my wishes, basically I'll crush you. I love that. I love your response to that. That's amazing.
Well, my attitude was your attitude. It's the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And if you can't accept that, then fuck you. Except I never said fuck you to people.
Right.
I was as polite as could possibly be, because you have to love people. You have to love even your enemies in some way.
Right. Oh my gosh. Well, one of the people you talked about a little while ago, and Junk, Mellencamp, he's amazing. Miss Jett, I have a particular affinity for her just because we were both born in the same Philadelphia hospital, Lankenau Hospital.
Amazing.
Yes, I was born so I'm like, oh man, I was born in the same hospital as Joan Jett. Oh yeah, so she's awesome. But she wrote the foreword for your book, did she not?
Yeah, she wrote the foreword for the book, bless her soul. Yeah. And the story with Joan Jett is that I had been I had founded an East Coast Public and Artist Relations department for ABC Records at one point. And ABC Records is in a building that's just terrible. It's one of those big modern skyscrapers. And so I had a glass cubicle without a window. You could see a window way, way off in the distance. But to get to the offices that actually did have windows, you had to go past my little cubicle. And there was a songwriter who used to make visits to our A&R guy. A&R is a talent scout, who had the big office with the windows. And he used to pass my cubicle. And I was sitting there like a goldfish in a bowl, despite having a staff of 5 people. And he would always smile and say hello. And if you grew up an outcast like I did, with no friends, then anyone who takes the time out to pay attention to you and smile at you has you for life. So one day, this songwriter called me. And he said, can I come in and visit you? I need to ask a favor. So he came into my office. His name was Kenny Laguna. And he explained that he'd been hired to produce an album for Joan Jett. And Joan Jett the Runaways had just broken up. The Runaways had been huge in Japan. They'd been huge in Europe. And they'd been modestly successful, minorly successful in the United States. And when it broke up, Joan was being handled by a live entertainment, Shep Gordon's company. He's generally terrific. Mm-hmm. But according to Kenny, when he met up with her, there was a Swedish record company that was paying for this album. They were paying $25,000 to make the album. Most albums were $100,000 in those days. They could go over $1 million in production costs in those days. But Kenny was given $25,000 to work with to make a Swedish record. Joan was playing in German clubs, the same clubs that the Beatles had played in. And apparently she wasn't being booked into hotel rooms because she wasn't making enough money to pay the costs of a hotel and proper travel expenses. So she was sleeping on the concrete floors of the clubs at night. which is something I had done a long time ago, but that's another story. That's from my book, how I started the hippie movement, which we'll skip over. So, and she was all sweated up, and she was laying there in her leather coat, shivering all night long. And Kenny couldn't stand it. So Kenny took over from her managers, so she would be taken better care of, so she'd be fed and given a bed to sleep in. So Kenny came into my office, and I sat him on my couch, and I sat in a chair, which means I was towering over him, and which is not easy when you're the size of a flea, which I am. But at any rate, so Kenny explained that he wanted me to get one line in Cashbox. Now, there were 3 trade magazines in those days. The number 1 trade magazine was Billboard. The number 2 trade magazine was Record World. The runt of the litter was Cashbox. Wow. And he felt that if I could get him a sentence in Cashbox, a record company would sign her, and then he wouldn't have to manage her. The record company would make her a star. Well, and one other little fact. She'd been turned down by 27 record companies.
Oh, my God.
That was just about every record company there was. Jeez. Back in 1979. So I sat Kenny down, I towered over him, and I said, Kenny, look, there's no such thing as getting one line in Cashbox and getting a record deal. One line in Cashbox will get you nothing. Secondly, the day that you get a record company contract is the day your troubles begin. Your record company will throw every conceivable obstacle in your path, and you have to have a Panzer tank strategy. A Panzer tank was able in World War II to roll over a chicken coop, to roll over a small house, to roll over a tree. You have to have a strategy that is capable of going over any obstacle the record company can possibly conceive. And I will give you that strategy. If you work the way I work, 17 hours a day, if you work 7 days a week, and if you do everything I tell you to, I guarantee you we will have a star in 2 years. Now, Scott, there's something very important you have to know. I've only made that statement twice in my life. And I've made it on the basis of having a vision, whatever the hell a vision is. First time I did it was with the manager of a group called Rufus, that prided itself on its democracy. Every member was equal to every other member. And it had a number 3 hit on the charts. So I went out to pick up that manager in a limousine from the airport. He was coming in from California. He was Diana Ross's husband.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the father of Tracy Ellis Ross, or whatever her name is.
Okay.
So I knew that if I had him in the limo at rush hour, we were going to be baked in traffic. I would have him as a total captive. And I told him something simple. Look, if you let me take all of the attention and put it on your lead singer, and you cover my ass with the rest of the band that wants this to be an egalitarian democracy, I guarantee you I will give you a star. That's the only other time I said that.
Wow.
Can you guess the name of that lead singer? Chaka Khan.
Oh, wow. Chaka Khan. Chaka Khan. Yeah, man. Oh, my gosh.
Was that vision accurate?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, you might say. You might say.
So I said it. So I said it for the second time with Joan Jett, and wow. Kenny did exactly what I told him to. And I said, okay, first she has to have a touring band. So they got together a touring band. Then I said, we've got to get her dates. And I set her up with a booking agency that I had a close relationship with, FBI, which is the booking agency that put punk on the map. And a month later, when FBI hadn't delivered a single date, I hounded the ass out of the head of FBI, who I was close to, and said, you have got to start delivering dates. And he started to deliver dates. And so we did the entire Eastern Coast Board, whatever it's called, Atlantic Seaboard Strip, all the way from Bangor, Maine, down to the Florida Keys. And we did it for the first time, and Joan had audiences of probably 50 people. We did it a second time, and Joan had audiences of 150 people. We did it a third time, and Joan had audiences of 450 people. Wow. And then Kenny got all excited, because the owners of the clubs, you have to underwrite, you have to subsidize a tour like this. And Kenny was subsidizing it with the money he'd been saving for his infant daughter's college education. And finally, the club owners were calling and offering real money. So it looked to Kenny like he'd be able to repay his daughter's college fund. And I said, Kenny, you have to say no to all of these offers. And now you have to do the same thing a little bit further to the west, the whole strip, from, God knows, Cleveland to Louisiana. And you have to do it 3 times, again. And then when they start to offer you money, you have to say no all over again. And you have to do the next strip to the west, because we are on a deadline here. We have a hit song on this album. It's called I Love Rock and Roll.
Oh, my God.
Remember, this is an album. This is an album that had been turned down by 26 record companies.
That's insane.
And I said, we have to do this with every strip of the country, all the way out to the West Coast, before that song hits, or Joan will be a one-hit wonder. She won't have a solid base of people who know her and her performance and who are wedded, who are bonded to her, who will never let her go. That's what the ritual of a rock concert produces. If the performer on stage is really good, the audience will never lose the bond to that artist.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Never let that artist.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Kenny did what I told him to. And then I said, I need you to print up 350 copies of that Swedish album. You can make up any label name you want. But if I've got Joan going into Cleveland and she doesn't have a record, I can't get any press for her at all. If I've got Joan going into Cleveland and she does have a record, no matter how insignificant the record company, then I can get features in the 2 daily papers in Cleveland. I can get morning television for Joan. I can get everything for Joan. So Kenny probably produced not 350 records, but 6,000 records. And then he did something that had never occurred to me, Scott. I don't know why I was so dumb. He hired a promotion man. A promotion man is a guy with good radio contacts who can get you airplay. And Steve Lees was the name of that promotion man. He's now the head of Sirius XM Radio. And Steve was brilliant. This is a non-existent label, Blackheart Records. And he managed to get Joan airplay all over the country. So you put all these elements together, and finally, Kenny also was working with Alan Grubman, who was a friend of mine. You've probably seen Alan Grubman's name in the headlines recently, because there are a bunch of hackers who have hacked into all of Alan Grubman's records, and he has done every superstar imaginable, and has blackmailed him and said, give us $122 million, or we will release all of this secret correspondence with all of your superstars, Madonna, Billy Joel, all of them.
Oh, my God.
So Alan was a friend of mine, and Alan was a friend of Kenny's, because it was the beginning of Alan's career. And Kenny managed to get Alan to get another one of Alan's clients to sign Joan. That other client was Casablanca Records, Neil Bogart. And then the record companies determine 4 priority records for the week. Their promotion men go into radio stations, and their job depends on it, is to get those 4 records airplay. And Casablanca Records already had a record that was playing on the turntables. It was Joan Jett's record. So the promotion guys begged people at radio to take Joan Jett's record off the radio so that they could put on the 4 priority records of the week. So one day I went to Alan Grubman's office, and Alan is even shorter than I am and far, far rounder. I'm like a pencil. He's like a handball. And he was trying to get from his desk out to the door to go to a meeting down the corridor. And when he was still sidling through that narrow space between the desk and the drawer and had just come out from behind the desk, I pinned him up against the wall. Scott, I have never done this in my life. I am worthless at physical intimidation, period. But I pinned him up against the wall and saying, tell Neil Bogart you are not going to fuck with this artist. You are not going to turn her into a tax write-off.
Oh, my God.
Period. And Alan listened, despite the way I presented the message. And so Joan went on the priority lists. Wow. And it turned out that my prediction these two visions that I've had, both of which turned out to be accurate, was not as accurate as I like to think. Because remember, I had told Kenny, we will have a star in 2 years. We went double platinum in 18 months from the time Kenny and I had that conversation.
Yeah.
18 months.
Yeah.
So be careful with your visions. I mean, you may have visions. If you have them, then do something about them. If you feel you're sufficiently well, look, you have to steep yourself in whatever the area of your interest is. You have to soak yourself in it. You have to know its movements second by second, its rhythms. I have a friend, he's a fan of my books, named Dr. Alexander Eldon. And he wrote what PBS calls the Bible of day trading. And if Alex has to take a day away from trading, he gives himself 2 days to get back into it before he makes a trade. Because he has to breathe the rhythms of the market. I breathed the rhythms of the rock and roll business, second by second, hour by hour. I was super saturated in it. I call this in one of my books, The Genius of the Beast, a Radical Revision of Capitalism, saturated intuition. When you are just saturated with knowledge of your industry. And if you have a vision in the midst of that saturation with knowledge, that vision may well prove to be true. You will not have many of them, but if you have some, they can be gifts. I mean, my greatest gift with Michael Jackson, look, Michael Jackson was the greatest gift I've ever been given in my life. He's the greatest gift I've ever been given as a science person, or a music person, or a person. Why? Because those first two rules of science, the truth at any price, including the price of your life, and look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there, the law of awe and wonder. Michael was the living incarnation of those rules in a way I never expected to see in my life.
He was an amazing individual. I mean, and you know, I was a kid. I'm a kid of the 80s. You know, so
right.
Yeah, I had the Thriller album. As a matter of fact, Thriller might have been the first tape that I ever got and popped into my Fisher-Price tape recorder and played that baby. You know, and I mean,
and a lot of kids were doing that. A lot of 3-year-olds were doing that.
Yeah. Now it's funny because I told you at the very beginning of our conversation, I had this plan of all these things I wanted to talk about, but then when I started to learn more about you and see some of your background, I just threw it all out the window. But one of the things that I did want to ask you about, because your career has been just that of legend, truly. And again, everyone, we are here with Howard Bloom, and he's got a new book out, Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me. Go buy it. I'm reading it myself. I mean, the stories are absolutely incredible. But Michael Jackson, I mean, and then you talk about guys like Prince, Freddie Mercury from Queen, these are oh my God, Jimi Hendrix. I mean, we have lost these legends that you've worked with so early, way before their time, and here you still are. I was going to ask you, who had the most, who shocked you the most, like with their early passing, and which one hurt you the most? But again, the more I've learned about you, obviously there is only one answer, and that's Michael Jackson.
Yeah. Michael Jackson was, look, I was truly blessed to be able to meet Michael Jackson. Because Michael Jackson was not like any other human being you've ever met in your life. As I said, he was the living instantiation, the living incarnation of the first two rules of science. And how do I know that? Well, let me tell you about the first time I met Michael. First of all, I had no interest in working with the Jacksons. The Jacksons' manager had been calling me for 4 months, and every time he called, I said no. And I said no for a reason. I said no because, look, the Jacksons are the biggest thing that ever was. They're Elvis Presley and the Beatles all combined. And you could get a talking dog to say Michael Jackson on the phone, and any newspaper or magazine editor anywhere in the country would say, yes, I'll give you a cover in exchange for an interview. And you don't need me for that. I don't do that. I don't do easy. I do hard.
Right.
And then they called and they said, look, the Jacksons are coming into town. They'll be at the Helmsley Palace in New York City. You're in New York City. We want you to meet them. And now I had learned, look, I did not grow up among other humans. As I said, other kids didn't want to have anything to do with me. My parents didn't have any time for me. So I grew up in a bedroom full of guinea pigs and laboratory rats and guppies. So I didn't know normal human rituals. But I had heard a phrase, to be a mensch, to be a real man. If you're going to say no to somebody, you owe it to them to say no to them to their face.
Right.
So since all I can be is a mensch, I have no choice, I said yes to the meeting. So at midnight, I went into Manhattan, and I went to one of the top floors of the Helmsley Palace, and I knocked on the door, and somebody opened it. Now, Scott, the door opened this much, 3 inches, just that much. And all of a sudden, I could see I was going to need to say yes to the Jacksons. And the reason was simple. Through that narrow aperture of the door, you could see 4 guys sitting literally up against the wall. And there was an audio tape commercial in those days, an audio tape advertisement. And it had a picture of a guy sitting in a seat like this with headphones like the ones you are wearing, blasted up against the chair and up against the wall behind him. They must have had a 140 mile per hour wind-sized fan on him. And every single one of the Jacksons looked like that, looked blasted up against the wall by some unknown force. And the instant you saw that, you knew they were in trouble. There was some deep trouble that no one in the room could articulate. Mm. So I walked in and I said yes. After 4 months of saying no,
wow,
I said yes because of a problem nobody could articulate. Not a single one of the Jacksons said we have a problem. I had to sense the problem, I guess, with a sense that's akin to that vision thing. And somebody was out to destroy the Jacksons tour. Mm. Somebody very smart was out to destroy the Jacksons.
This person
tour.
has a name?
I have a suspicion of who it was.
Okay.
So, to me, look, I knew how to build careers. That was really what I did. My staff did publicity, and I trained them in doing it in a very strange way. Most publicists are satisfied if they get 6 good stories for you in a month. My team had to get you a minimum of 60 stories in a month, and an average of 120 stories in a month, and in a really good month, 770 stories.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we didn't do press like anybody else in the business did it. Not at all. So my staff could handle the press. I mean, when it came to a really super important story, I could deliver it. But my real job was seeing your career, watching it before you ever came to me, seeing what its problems and its opportunities were before you ever came to me. So I had an analysis of where you stood already. And then looking at the manager, seeing what aspects of management he could handle, because most managers had lucked out with one act, and then claimed they could do it again and never, ever did it again. Bill Aucoin was like that with Kiss. Tommy Mottola was like that with Hall & Oates. These guys lucked into these things.
Lightning in a bottle. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to look and see what were the things the manager could do and what were the things the manager couldn't do. And the things the manager couldn't do, I would do, without ever claiming any credit for it, because if I did, I would be damaging the ego of that poor manager. Mm-hmm. I had to make it look as if he was doing it all. Nice. In the same way that you in the beginning, you introduced the fact that any rock star is made by a team. And the quality of that team has everything to do with how far that rock star is going to go. But the team's job is to stay invisible, so that it looks as if the rock star is flying without wires. We are the wires, and our job is to remain invisible.
Interesting. Yeah.
These days, when people want to do stories on me, they say, send me the pictures of you with your clients. And I have to tell them, I absolutely forbade any picture ever being taken of me with one of my clients. Because my job was not to publicize me. Mm-hmm. My job, if you were my client, was to be a kamikaze on behalf of you. Period. And there's another factor here, and it's that you spend time with your client,
Right.
and you do what I used to call secular shamanism. That is deep diving for the soul, the gods inside of you.
Mm.
And then you know those gods because they have found a place within the empathic centers in you. Hermann Hesse, the novelist, Siddhartha was one of his books, big in the 1960s.
Okay.
So Hermann Hesse said, there's a little closet hidden deep in the darkness inside of you, and it contains 10,000 personalities that you could have been. Well, so my job as your publicist is not only to find the gods inside of you, it's to find the corresponding gods inside of me, so that I have a model of you, in me, at all times. So that if your manager calls, and your Prince, and your manager says, we haven't seen the kid, meaning Prince, for a year. We have the lyrics to his next album. You're not supposed to know that we have them. You're not supposed to see them. If they show up in your office at 10:30 tomorrow morning, can you tell me what Prince is thinking? And the answer was yes. And it wasn't yes because of some spooky, psychic kind of thing. It wasn't like your Yeller bending spoons. It was yes because I had that Prince inside of me. Wow. And if they gave me the strongest bit or the simplest bit of evidence for where Prince was coming from this year, like the lyrics, for example, yes, I could tell you what Prince was thinking. And that's what you have to do for your clients. It's this business of knowing the star-making machine and being able to build the parts of it that your manager doesn't know or have and operate those parts for him invisibly. And being able to empath you totally.
So you're like the rock star whisperer.
Day by day, year by year. Yeah. And I believe that these things are desperately necessary to save people like Adam Levine and Ben Harper today. Because when the next Adam Levine and Ben Harper comes out, I don't want to see him prostituted. I don't want to see his message, the message he can carry to 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 16-year-old kids. I don't want to see that message destroyed.
Right. Well,
we need icons again.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more, Howard. And and the last thing I want to do right now is offend or insult any of the other publicists out there, because I get along so well with so many of you, and I do love you all. And, I just feel that maybe the industry, and no one would know this better than you, has changed. Like, the way you talk about your clients that you had over the years is such a very intimate and personal relationship, like a very, very close, like beyond a friendship, something beyond being just friends, beyond being the business partner, client relationship. What you're describing to me, Howard, sounds like so much more than that. And I don't know that philosophy is employed anymore in that business. What do you think of that? What do you think of that?
I used to say, fuck the words product.
Okay.
Fuck the word market. Fuck the word branding. This business is an exchange of human soul, period. You don't make a product. You make a record that comes from tearing pieces of your heart out and putting them down on vinyl. When you are singing, you are crying, you are whimpering, you are wailing, you are angry. When you go on stage, you have a muscular stance that is your primary message to your audience. And it's a totally emotional stance. It's not a product. It is a conveyance of soul from you to your audience and your audience back to you, strengthening you. If you don't know that, you're destroying the very stuff you're working with. Well, those terms, I was the only one ever to say that those terms should be forbidden. To say that those terms desecrated what music, what performance really is, and what the role of a performer in our lives really is. And when I left, that desecration went back to normal. To being normal.
Wow.
And it infuriates me. Because, as I said, people like Adam Levine and Ben Harper deserve to be icons because we need icons.
Right.
We need icons. They feed our soul.
Do you feel like there's anyone out there today that could be like the next Michael Jackson or Prince, because I mean, these are iconic figures, cultural icons that sold more albums, and made more money than most artists will ever even realize. Do you think that
Well,
there's anyone that could be like that today?
there was Radiohead, that was 20 years ago already.
Right.
There was Nirvana, that was 20 years ago already.
Right.
And now I'm listening to bands like the Fratellis, the Parlor Mob, them Crooked Vultures, the Queens of the Stone Age, a bunch of people like that. I'm listening to Fiona Apple and to Tori Amos and a bunch of people like that. Sarah Bareilles, I think her name is pronounced, is just an amazement.
Yeah.
She's an amazement.
Are you still active? Are you still active in the music business?
Oh, no. I had to go back to my science.
Okay.
I started writing my first book, The Lucifer Principle, in 1986.
Right.
I got sick in 1988. No doctor could tell me what was wrong with me, but it was horrible. Whatever it was, look, on a 95-degree day, I would have to wear a thinsulate vest. I'd be cold and shivering, literally shivering. Wow. And on a 65-degree day, I would be hot and sweating. And I would become so weak that, for 3 months, I just lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, and I didn't even have enough energy for the restlessness that makes you bored. I could have stared at that ceiling forever. And that's not me. That is not me.
Now, this was related to chronic fatigue syndrome, is that correct?
It turned out, I told my doctor, I think this is chronic fatigue syndrome, and he dismissed me because he didn't think it existed. And 3 years later, he came back to me and said, thank you for educating me about chronic fatigue syndrome, because I've been seeing it in a lot of my patients.
Wow.
So, in other words, I had to be out ahead of my doctors. All of them.
You are the scientist.
Yeah. But I'd been working on a book. It was half finished, and I had satisfied every intellectual curiosity I had in the music industry.
Okay.
Yes, I wanted to find the dark underbelly where new myths and movements are made. I found it. I became a part of it. I worked with the NAACP, the Black United Fund. I helped found Farm Aid. I worked to establish Amnesty International's visibility in the United States. Yeah. All of this stuff. Yeah. I produced the first radio public service spots for, guess what? Solar energy in 1981 with J.Y., guitarist from Styx.
Wow.
So I was part of the forces that were making history, part of that dark underbelly where new myths and movements are made. My job was myth making. Why? Because we need myths. Because they help us find ourselves. Because they are trellises on which we grow. That was the basic message of, you don't just owe your audience your songs, you owe your audience your life. And I had satisfied every mystery. U2 came to me, they were interested in working with me. I'd done that already. I didn't like U2's music. I wasn't interested. Mick Jagger's assistant came to me, and a person that was lovely and I regarded as a friend, and said, would you be interested in working with Mick Jagger? Well, the answer was no. I wasn't interested. I wasn't interested in being kicked around by a spoiled rock star. I'd satisfied all of my interests. I had helped make major phenomena. Right. I helped take an unknown 19-year-old from Minneapolis and make him one of the biggest stars of his time, Prince.
Yeah.
And I had played as I've told you, I didn't just do publicity. I worked the star-making machinery, which is a machinery very few people know exists. And I needed to get out so I could finish my book and go back to my science. But Scott, you may know this from experience. If you are successful in a field, look, the Billboard Guide to Music Publicity, a college textbook, had 20 uninterrupted pages on just me. That's insane.
That's pretty cool.
On what I called perceptual engineering, which was my overall approach to publicity. And your wife won't let you go. She won't let you out of that job.
No, she won't. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be talking about mine. No, I'm sorry.
But I was so sick that I had no choice. I had to drop out. And then my wife divorced me. And I was left with only one thing, my science. So was the universe telling me anything? Something I already knew because I wanted to go back to writing my books of original thinking about science? The universe was saying, this is the only choice you've got left, bozo. Take it, grab it with all your worth. So I was sick in bed for 15 years. For 5 years, I was too sick to talk.
Wow.
And too sick to have another person in the room with me. I didn't have the strength to work my vocal cords, even to make a syllable.
Wow.
And I wrote 3 books, and I founded 2 international scientific groups from my computer. But Scott, it took me 3 years. For 3 years, I struggled to my front room and tried to sit in my favorite office chair and tried to work in a normal manner. And the times in which I could do it grew shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And finally, I realized it takes a lot of energy to walk to the front room and sit up. Maybe if I lay down and have 2 computers installed next to my bed and a Chinese box that allows me to control the 2 of them through 1 monitor and 1 keyboard, and I just lay there, it will help me. And you know what? After I did that, my voice began to return. And also, look, you don't know it, and I didn't know it at the time. You have an image of what you will be doing in the future. And it's there with you always. It's there with you wherever you go, whenever you are awake, whenever your eyes are open. And it gives you, you don't know this, it gives you a sense of humanity, of being a human being. My sense of my future had been ripped violently away from me. My future was going to be doing the kind of tour that my rock bands did, hitting every major city, doing this is for my book, my first book, doing every major newspaper, every television show, just the kind of stuff that I had set up for my artists, and taking my wife with me so we could somehow get a half an hour off and go from our 14th floor hotel room overlooking the city out on the streets and explore the city a little bit, and then go on to the next city. That was my future, as far as I was concerned.
Good future. No.
Yeah. But it's all ripped away. And I was forced back to the only thing I had left, which was my science itself and writing the books. I could write the books. I couldn't go out and promote them.
But even with your, your career has just been so amazing. And I can't imagine how many other people you've inspired, not just through science, but certainly, in the music world, being a writer. Obviously, you've done so many different things. All of the various speaking engagements that you've done. I can't imagine someone like you is very easily forgotten about to the point where you don't have your choice of what you want to do. I would have to, it's mind-boggling me to think that you wouldn't be able to just throw your hat back into the ring and, manage the biggest rock stars in the world today. Has anyone reached out to you recently to say, hey, Howard, time to get back in the game?
Every 3 months or so, some minor unknown figure who probably isn't going to make it gets hold of me and says, would you please do for me what you did for your stars way back then? And the answer is no. I had to reassert my scientific credibility when I got sick. Okay. Who's going to take a legendary rock and roll publicist seriously in the sciences? Nobody. Absolutely nobody. By now, it was hard work, but by now I have been published. I've either been published in peer-reviewed journals or have given lectures at scholarly conferences in 13 different fields. And they go all the way from quantum physics. That's an international conference of quantum physicists in Moscow, where I told them that everything they know about quantum physics is wrong. And I thought they'd throw me out of the conference. And they sat there beaming like proud uncles. And I couldn't figure out why. And then 3 years later, I got an email from my collaborator in theoretical physics at the Keldysh Institute of Applied Mathematics of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Pavel Karakin. And Pavel said, Dr. Uzhikov, the man who ran that conference you thought you'd be thrown out of, has just published a book. You have to download it from ArXiv.org immediately and read it. So I downloaded it. I put it on my Kindle. I listened to it on my Kindle while I was taking my walk through the park, and I was amazed. Every concept I had given these guys was in this book.
Oh my God.
So when I got to the cafe where I was working in those days, I immediately got out my laptop and wrote to Dr. Uzhakov, the guy who ran the conference, the guy who wrote the book, and said, Dr. Uzhakov, I don't know if you remember me. I'm that crazy American who was at your conference. And I got one of those emails back. Remember you? Didn't you read the first half of my book? So, so that's quantum physics and cosmology I've done.
Yeah.
And the abiotic evolution of the cosmos I've done, and evolutionary biology I've done, and evolutionary psychology I've done, and neuroscience I've done, and aerospace I've done, and governance, and a whole, I mean, I keynoted a conference on governance the UN put together in Seoul, Korea. Why they chose me, I don't know, but they did. So it was a 4-day amazing conference. So and information science. I presented a paper at a conference on information science, a summit on information science in Vienna, Austria. And then at one session, we were waiting for the speaker, and the person came up on stage and said, "Our speaker presentation," and I said I would. And I gave a spontaneous presentation that turned out to be one of the hits of the conference. So, but it was one of 2 presentations. I gave a formal presentation as well. So that's the deal. I run a team right now. First of all, Buzz Aldrin.
Oh my God! Wow.
Buzz conned me into founding a group 15 years ago called the Space Development Steering Committee, which I founded and which I run to this day and does some fairly important things. And then I founded another group that includes a 3-star general, the former governor of New York State, who's a Democrat, and Newt Gingrich, who is obviously not a Democrat.
Yes, former Speaker of the House.
And I tried to hand the leadership of that team over to the 3-star general, and he wouldn't let me. He kept making sure that it was me, that it was all on me, period. However, this general 2 years ago sent me an email out of the blue, and it said, Howard, you are a consummate leader. Imagine getting that from a general whose whole business is leadership. It's one of those things that almost makes your knee. And when it comes to Einstein, Michael Jackson, and me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll, the current book,
yes,
I don't know if you've seen the reviews.
Yes.
They're the kinds of things, they make your knees buckle too.
Right.
They say the most astonishing things. They basically say, this is a book for the ages. This is a book that, like the Bible, will be around generation after generation after generation. This book flushes away all of our common sense and replaces it with a whole new sensibility. Idea of the gods inside. Changes the way you think about everything.
You've changed the way I think about a lot of things. You know, just in the, last 90 minutes, you and I have had a chance to chat. But, again, everybody, we are here with the legendary Howard Bloom, and he's got his new book out, Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me. Oh, man. Incredible. As far as enticing, the audience to go out and get this book, not that they should need much at this point, but what's something that you would like to implant, I guess, on everybody's brain? Like, what is, like, a synopsis? What's something that they're really going to get out of this? Like we talked about the gods inside of all of us,
right.
And obviously, there's going to be quite a bit of, Michael Jackson story, in
There's
here.
a lot of Michael Jackson, yes, because he's so fucking important.
What's something that maybe no one's ever known? Because he was tabloid fodder, for a long time. I mean, he was the biggest cultural icon of my lifetime, I mean, being born back in 1975. Well,
let me tell you a story of the first time that I met him.
Okay.
We were at Marlon Jackson's pool house in Encino, California. A pool house is a little 2-story building It's got one room on the first floor and another room on the second floor. It's only big enough for one room on each floor. And the room on the first floor the wall was just totally surrounded with arcade games. Arcade games were so expensive that only boardwalk owners could afford them.
Right.
And yet there they were, a half a dozen of them lined up around the wall. And in the middle of the room was a pool table. And the brothers, from the time of that first meeting at the Helmsley Palace, they adopted me as like another brother.
Wow. So
we're standing at this pool table, looking at merchandise, looking at T-shirts, looking at jackets, and I'm trying to explain to them, look, you represent a degree of wonder that is beyond anything humans have ever conceived before, which means that every T-shirt that you use for merchandising has to have that quality of awe and wonder. Every tour jacket that you put together has to have that quality of awe and wonder. So, and in the middle of this, trying to school the brothers on how to judge about merchandise, which probably they knew in their hearts already. It just took somebody to articulate it. Okay. The screen door opened. Now, remember, I did not grow up among human beings. I don't know normal human rituals. And when I was 19 and living on a kibbutz in Israel, somebody took me and said, look, here's what you do when somebody wants you to meet somebody else. You walk up to that person and you say, hi, my name is Howard. And the other person will say, hi, my name is whatever his name is. But I had never done it before, Scott. And all of a sudden, I left the brothers. I walked around the pool table. I went over to the screen door. I stuck out my hand. I said, hi, my name is Howard. Now, here's something you have to know. I had read literally 1,000 articles on Michael. And every one of them said Michael is a bubble baby. That try to touch Michael, he will shrink from your grasp. So I put out my hand and I said, hi, I'm Howard. And Michael put out his hand and he put his hand in mine and he shook hands. It was not one of those handshakes designed to crush you and show you how powerful the other person is. It was a perfectly normal, hi, I'm Michael handshake. And he said, hi, I'm Michael. As simple as that.
Wow.
And I said, Michael, I have a press release I need to get your approval on. Can we find some place where I can read it to you? So we went up the stairs. And the second floor room was piled to the ceiling with keyboards and amplifiers. So Michael found an amplifier to sit on, and I found an amplifier to sit on. And I started to read Michael the press release. A couple things you need to know. When I was 12 years old, a girl in 8th grade had turned her eyes toward me, which had never happened before, made eye contact, which is even more startling, and said, I told my mother you understand the theory of relativity. Well, I didn't understand the theory of relativity, but I wasn't going to confess it to her because the only thing I had going for me in that school was they called me the sickly scientist. That was the only recognition I got. So I pedaled as soon as school was out, I pedaled on my bicycle over to the local library where the librarians literally knew me better than my mother did. And I said, give me everything you've got on the theory of relativity. So they gave me 2 books, a great big fat book by Einstein and 2 collaborators, and a little skinny book by Einstein himself. And I pedaled home, and I took them to my bedroom, and I started to read the big fat book because I had learned by that point in my life that if you go through something you don't think you can understand a word of, if you make it all the way through to the end, you will have understood something.
Right.
And this book was all equations with 7 words of English on a page, and I've never understood equations. But I made it to page 50, and then at 8 o'clock, I had a sudden realization. My mom is going to put me to bed at 10 o'clock. If I don't understand the theory of relativity by then, I will be humiliated when I go back to school. So I left the big book reluctantly and went to the little skinny book. And the little skinny book was entirely by Einstein. And it had an introduction. And in the introduction, it felt as if Albert Einstein himself had reached out through the pages, grabbed me by the front of my shirt and put his nose up to mine and said, schmuck, listen up.
Wow.
To be a genius, he said, it is not enough to come up with a theory that only 3 men in the world can understand. To be a genius, you have to be able to come up with that theory and then be able to explain it so clearly and so deliciously that anyone with a high school education and a reasonable degree of intelligence can understand it. So when I was 12, Albert Einstein had given me marching orders. He had said, if you want to be an original scientific thinker, you will have to be one of the best writers on planet Earth. Wow. So I had become obsessed with writing and obsessed with poetry and obsessed to the extent that I was basically kidnapped and forced into being the editor of the literary magazine at NYU. And that magazine, which I transformed into an experimental graphics and literary magazine, won 2 National Academy of Poets prizes.
Wow.
And NYU's poet in residence thought I would be the next great poet to come out of NYU. So I took my writing very seriously. And all of that was packed into even the press releases that I wrote. Wow. So I'm sitting there with Michael, and I'm reading him the press release. And after the first few sentences, Michael goes, oh, 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 oh. And finally, when I get to the end, Michael says, did you write that? And of course I had written it. And he said, that's beautiful. No one, not a single soul, not Mellencamp, not Prince, not any of them, had ever seen the craft, the art, wow, in a press release. Wow. And Michael saw it.
Wow. Then
we went downstairs, and there was a meeting scheduled with the art director from CBS. And I had managed to jump ship from my 4 graduate school fellowships in neuroscience by starting a commercial art studio with the artists that I recruited for this experimental graphics and literary magazine I'd been forced unwillingly to edit and art direct. And so I started an commercial art studio with them because I knew that if I went to grad school, it would be Auschwitz for my mind. Mm. I knew that I would be giving paper and pencil tests to 22 college students at a time in exchange for a psychology credit. And where are the gods inside in that picture? They are nowhere. The kinds of passions I'm talking about, the ecstatic passions that overtake you when you are an artist on stage in front of an audience, are nowhere to be found in that room with 22 college students. So I would have a career in which I never got anywhere near what I needed to understand.
Wow. That's awesome.
So I jumped ship and co-founded a commercial art studio. Okay, so now we're standing at the billiard table, the Jacksons and I. The Jacksons are flanking us. Michael is on my right side. His whatever this is called, his forearm is up against my forearm. His shoulder is up against my shoulder. His joint here is up against my joint here. His knee is up against my knee. And the art director walks in with 5 of the most gorgeous portfolios you've ever seen. The portfolio for my art studio was inexpensive black vinyl. These are all hand-tooled leather and hand-tooled cherry wood.
Wow.
And I know the names of these artists because they are legends who we were competing with in my art studio days. They were so far above us that it was ridiculous. I mean, I made it on the cover of Art Direction magazine, if you can believe that. Wow. And I invented a new animation technique for NBC TV. And we did all of the advertising graphics when ABC decided to take its 7 FM stations and stop playing Top 40 and go into a format that was totally untried and could have killed the entire radio operation at ABC. It had been hatched at Bard College, a very weird little college in New York State. It was called Progressive Radio, otherwise known as Album Radio. And they were put all 7 stations into this untried format. And my artists did all of the graphics that, I hate to use this word, branded those stations, except it wasn't branding. This is stuff that came out of the heart and soul of one of my artists that was designed to speak to the heart and soul of the kids that it reached, telling them that their heart and souls would be nourished by this new form of radio, which was a true promise. It was not a false promise. So, and ABC asked me to found an advertising agency to handle all of their advertising, which I didn't want to do because I didn't want to learn time buying.
Right.
So I recognized the names of these artists. They were the legends in their field. And the art director slid the first portfolio across the table to us. It was by a guy named Michael Whalen, whose work is amazing, phenomenal, fantastic. And Michael opened it 1 inch. 1 inch. And you know the poem by William Blake about seeing infinity in the tiniest of things?
Yes,
And
yes.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah.
Michael opened that an inch and he went, oh. And his knees bent a little bit. And he went, oh. And his knees bent further. Oh. 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 So in that first inch, Michael had seen the infinite.
Wow.
Michael had seen more in that first inch than even Michael Whalen, the artist, had ever seen. And by the time he opened the full thing, he was in full aesthetic orgasm. And remember, my knee was up against his knee. My elbow was up against his elbow. My shoulder was up against his shoulder. And you communicate muscular emotions. And I felt that fucking orgasm of Michael's, and it was astounding.
Oh, man.
I had never encountered anything like that in my life.
That's incredible.
And what's the second law of science? Look at things right under your nose as if you have never seen them before and then proceed from there. It's the law of awe and wonder, and I had just seen more awe and wonder in a fellow human being than I had ever imagined could possibly exist in my life.
Wow.
And the deal with Michael was, he felt this awe, wonder, and surprise was something he had been given by God. And because he had been given it as a gift from God, it was his job to give it to as many of his fellow human beings on planet Earth as possible. Awe, wonder, surprise. So one day I was sitting at my desk in Manhattan, and I kept a little very cheap red nylon knapsack behind my desk, and it contained a TRS-100 computer, the very first laptop, and it contained a spare shirt, a razor, and a toothbrush, because I used to get phone calls calling me to emergencies. So I got a phone call at 4 o'clock, very typical, and they said, voice on the other end said, Michael is canceling his tour, and you're the only one he will listen to. You have to be out here by 11 o'clock tonight.
Wow.
So I got my assistant or my secretary to get me a flight to LA and get me a car service, and ran downstairs to jump in the car and get to the airport as quickly as I possibly could. And I rented a car when I got to LA, and I drove to the address that I had been given. And the address turned out to be the middle of a studio lot. And a studio lot at night is spooky, because the studio buildings are like giant aircraft hangars.
Right.
And they're dark at night. And even if they're fully lit, you can see the light coming out of the translucent top. But the light still seems totally swallowed in darkness. There's no way you can make enough light to fill one of those buildings at night. And I walked into this giant studio hangar, and there were the Jacksons rehearsing on a 110-foot stage, one of the biggest stages I'd ever seen in my life. We waited until they were finished with their rehearsal. We all filed out. Have you ever been in a dressing trailer?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a little trailer fixed up as a dressing room.
Right.
And walked in, and it had two banquettes of seats up against the right side and the left side. And then next to the entrance, there was a little banquette, which was the throne. So Michael took the throne, and I took the seat immediately to his left. So I'd be non-threatening, but in a power position. And Michael explained, we were getting terrible press, which I was trying my best to stop. It had started before I got involved. Okay. A guy named Dave Marsh, who was one of the kings of the critics, and every critic imitates, apes. Anything he says, they say too, had said, nobody we know has been hired to do the staging. So the stage is going to fall apart. Nobody we know we know the best people in the business. And nobody we know has been hired to do the lighting. So these 140-foot lighting towers are going to fall on the heads of the audience and kill people. Nobody we know has been hired to do the sound. So the sound system is going to electrocute people. And nobody we know has been hired to do security. So gangs are going to be running up and down the aisles with knives, eviscerating people. And you won't dare send your children or take your children to a Jackson concert. This is the Victory Tour. So Michael explained why all these negative stories had been possible. He said, a year and a half ago, I went out to find absolutely the best and most surprising people I could find. And each one I signed to an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement.
Right.
Each one I signed to secrecy. That's why Dave Marsh didn't know who was doing the lighting, the staging, and the security, because the best people had been hired, but they were hired in utter secrecy.
Okay.
With the requirement that they remain utterly silent. Why? Because Michael gets awe, wonder, and surprise out of things. And he wanted to surprise his audience totally with this tour of his. And he said, but my brother Jackie is the best dancer that I know. And Jackie has just come down with a bone chip in his knee. And he had arthroscopic surgery 6 weeks ago. And the doctors were sure he'd be ready to tour by now. And he's not. And it could take him another couple of months to recuperate. Again, he is the best dancer I have ever seen. Now, think of that statement coming from Michael Jackson.
I was just going to say, coming from Mr. Moonwalk and everything else. I mean,
yeah, who has studied everybody from James Brown to Fred Astaire, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And his brother Jackie, he feels, and his opinion counts a lot. Nobody would know this, dare take anything less than his best out to his kids. And while he is describing this, and while he is describing his utter commitment, his utter obligation to his kids, to give them awe, wonder, and surprise, I have another of my visions. And this is the first vision, Scott, I've ever had that's visual.
Wow.
That's not just in my gut. And I see Michael Jackson's ribs as golden gates. And I see those gates opening. And I see 10,000 kids inside of him. And those are his kids. And he will protect them at any cost, including at any cost to himself.
Wow. So
Michael's speech is prophetic. I mean, it has the power of a Muhammad or a Moses. And I have to go up against him because I know certain truths too. And I have to go up against him with those truths and with prophetic power, like with Alan Grubin when I put him up against the wall.
Right on.
And I have to explain to Michael, if you cancel this tour, all of these rumors about this tour being nothing but a flake show, all flaky, is you are going to validate those rumors. Mm. And parents will not dare take their kids to your concerts. And your tour will fail. And you will not reach those 10,000 kids, your guest. And you will not be able to give them awe, wonder, and surprise. Because nobody will go to your shows. And Michael changed his mind.
Coming from you, it sounds like you guys had a very special relationship, and like he took your counsel very, very seriously.
Apparently he did. I suspect that the reason that they called and said you're the only one he will listen to is because it was against Michael's religion to have anything to do with voting. But the NAACP wanted to set up voter registration booths at every show. And I thought that was a vital obligation on behalf of the black community. Mm. That Michael and the brothers owed that to the black community. And so I pushed for it, even knowing that it was against Michael's religion. And you can see that I was a keeper of the flame of your fucking soul if I worked for you.
Right.
But sometimes that meant doing something that you didn't think you should do. And Michael was convinced. And he did it. Despite the fact that everybody around him knew he wouldn't. So, and somebody, a Michael Jackson fan, let me see if I can find this.
That's amazing.
Who's been working with me for the last year and a half, wrote something. I said that the further I go into this, here it is, that the further I go into this, the more I get the impression that despite the fact that Michael Jackson was surrounded by some of the most brilliant human beings on the planet, Here's the quote. I get the impression that I'm the only one who understood him. But that's got to be my ego speaking. That's just got to be sheer narcissism on my part. And here's what this Michael Jackson fan in Australia wrote to me. And remember, Michael Jackson fans know everybody who's ever been in his life.
Right.
And they know what the relationship was. He said, your vision, your experience was no choreographed performance or carnival trick. He trusted you. He wouldn't speak to anyone but you. He knew you were the only one to understand him.
Wow.
He spoke and you listened. He wasn't just speaking sounds. As you were a man of words and prophecy, his words, his deep words, had a power he knew you would understand. The energy and power brought a communion where you glimpsed his soul, the very soul you had been searching for. In that moment, your journey had come to its fruition. You saw and met the true Michael Jackson. You saw and experienced love, his true calling, to love children. You saw them all, alive at all times, inside his heart, the sick, the well, the abused, the abandoned, the burnt, the crippled. The spirit and innocence of the child, it was his God-ordered mission to rescue, heal, love, and care for, to fill their hearts too with awe and wonder, to excite, to surprise, to mesmerize. You witnessed the spirit of childhood, which he wished he could return to and reclaim. You saw Neverland.
Wow. That came from a fan?
That came from a Michael Jackson fan.
Wow. That is incredible. Now, I gotta ask you, Howard, were you and Michael close up until the time when he passed?
No.
No?
There was somebody working behind the scenes, the person who was trying to torpedo the tour, who worked very hard because, look, remember when I walked into that room at the Helmsley Palace and felt something evil in the air that nobody could articulate in any way whatsoever?
Right.
It took me years, it often takes me decades to process something that I know in my gut and to learn how to articulate it in words. And what I believe the brothers hired me for was to save their brother's soul.
Yeah.
Because it was in danger at that point.
Right.
And my first task was to get rid of Don King. Every time Don King spoke on behalf of the tour, remember, Don King is a murderer. Don King had a dispute over roughly $160 that he was owed with somebody, I believe, in Cleveland. And he kicked the man to the ground, and then he kicked the man until he was dead. That's Don King. Does Don King sound like somebody who can accurately represent the spirit of the Jacksons?
Yeah,
no, he represents the very opposite.
Yeah.
So it took me 3 months to get Don King muzzled, to get a gag order on him. And then I realized that whoever was torpedoing this tour was smart enough, this takes brilliance, was smart enough to remain totally invisible. And that the problem wasn't Don King. Don King was a decoy. And I started to hunt down the actual person who was doing this tour in. And as I got closer, that person apparently grew more aware of the fact that I was a danger to him. Mm-hmm. And he worked his ass off to destroy my relationship with the Jacksons.
That's terrible.
One day, for example, the Jacksons were in New York. CBS, their record company, Epic Records, had given them an entire conference room to do whatever they wanted with, which had never happened in my experience with any other star in the business.
No.
And as they were in this room, somebody came into the room and said, Howard is a spy from Prince. You have to get rid of him. A spy from Prince? Prince has his own fucking soul. He has his own inner fires. He has his own gods inside. He doesn't need anything from Michael Jackson. He's very different. I mean, the job of a star is to be the gods inside.
Right.
And you don't need to compete with somebody else to do that. In fact, you set up a new genre that didn't exist before.
Right.
If you are truly a star.
Right.
So it was crazy talk. But somebody was using crazy talk to try to get rid of me. And eventually they got me banished from the tour.
Oh my God.
During the tour, my way of working was this. I worked 5 days a week in my office. actually 4, and I worked 3 days a week out on the road with the Jacksons. And after every performance, during the performance, I went around everywhere taking notes on everything that was unique to this particular concert date. And then I came back, and there are press boxes in these stadiums. And when the Jackson show was over, I just read my notes to 120 press people who were all sitting there with laptops, typing away. That was my job. So I played a very important role on that tour. And somebody got me banished from the tour.
Wow.
And I never saw Michael or the brothers again.
Oh, my God.
And I haven't been able to make contact again. And yet, according to Jackson fans, now it's not just this one Jackson fan. Now it's the MJ Book Club. Now it's the MJ Podcast. A whole bunch of Michael Jackson fan gathering places. They seem to agree that I was the only one who understood him. And if you read this book, you will understand him too, and it just may change your life. And I'm serious about that. The reason I'm so serious about Michael Jackson all these years later, 30, 40 years later, is because it goes like this. I believe Michael Jackson has the power to change your life. And that's not a religious claim coming from a spook. Once upon a time, all the physiologists said it was impossible for human beings to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. Roger Bannister was a medical student. He and a fellow medical student analyzed every move he made when he was running and got rid of every energy-wasting move and turned it into an energy-productive move. And finally, Roger Bannister ran a mile in less than 4 minutes.
That's insane.
Okay, now this thing that had been impossible, according to all the experts, suddenly became possible. And now, if you look up the 4-minute mile in Wikipedia, it will tell you that every major professional or amateur runner runs the 4-minute mile. 1,800 people have run the 4-minute mile. Well, what Roger Bannister was to running the mile, Michael Jackson was to awe, wonder, surprise, and absolute commitment.
Wow.
Absolute commitment. And if you read this book, I hate to say this because it sounds egotistical, but if you read this book, you will understand that. And it will make you mourn the passing of Michael Jackson, but it will make you a better person with higher aspirations for yourself. And you just may do what all of those 1,800 runners did.
Wow.
You just may have a quality of awe, wonder, and surprise that is greater than that which you ever had before because of Michael Jackson's example, like Roger Bannister's example for runners. In other words, I believe that Michael Jackson, if his story is told right so that you actually understand who he was, that Michael Jackson has the power to push the perceptual envelope of mankind out just a little bit.
Wow.
And that's what we're here for.
Right
That's
on.
what we are here for, Scott.
Right on. Yeah, absolutely. Amen. I know you're not a spiritual person, not in, the conventional sense. Yeah, but amen to that. Seriously, that's incredible. Well, everybody, we are here with Howard Bloom, and I mean, you've heard so much about this book, and if you're not dying to go get it right now, there is definitely something wrong with you. Einstein, Michael Jackson, and me. Yeah, wow, absolutely awesome.
I just looked at the clock, and I'm due someplace at 9 o'clock.
All right, well, I know I got to let you go, but again, everybody, I mean, we're talking about an amazing scientist, author, and basically the godfather of music publicity. I'd listen to this man. So, Howard, thank you. It's been an honor, a privilege.
It has been a sheer pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, no, likewise, we must have a follow-up.
Okay.
After I read your book. After I am
Terrific.
done reading your book, we are going to I'm going to go down an outline, and we're just going to have to analyze some of this outline that I compile from
Great. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, and I have no doubt that it is a work of brilliance. Everybody, with all that, I am Scotty J. You are watching Rock Titan Live. We're out.